After examining all the evidence, I've came to the conclusion that some sort of malign presence has got dirt on the entire games industry, and the only way the games industry won't get killed by it is by releasing a new hero shooter every single month, effectively as a sacrifice. Okay, that's all bullshit, but it does kind of ring true with how the games industry's felt lately. Almost the idea of loads of disposable games that nobody really asked for that keep coming out and keep failing. Now, on that topic, I have a quote. Just barf something out, and if it doesn't immediately catch fire, just cut bait and go on to the next thing. That quote comes from Firewatch and Mark of the Ninja developer Niels Anderson. That's how he summed up the vibe of the games industry when he was speaking to PC Gamer. Now, that was after his new indie city builder game, Generation Exile, failed to sell. And you've probably felt this kind of thing as well. The near monthly press circus around game launches, game fails, game disappearances, often some sort of multiplayer effort that never really had a chance. We see that all the time. Now, of course, when you're an indie dev, people can at least understand, wheeling and dealing to keep a studio alive, trying to move on to the next chance, the next game. But for at least one AAA developer, it is actually their corporate strategy. Quite literally to churn out games in the hopes that one breaks through. Throwing shit at the wall to see what sticks. And for everything that they make that does not hit big enough, well, they may as well be disposable. So today, we're going to talk about disposable games as a strategy. Just 3 weeks after it launched, online extraction shooter The Cube Save Us has shut down. What is The Cube? Why is it going to save us? I don't think enough people actually played the game to find out those answers. Now, what the game was the latest effort from XL Games. They're the maker of the decade-old MMO Arcade. And despite it being the 7th most played game at the October Steam Next Fest, it launched in a bit of a messy condition, and it never really found a player base or positive reviews. It wasn't sustainable, so yeah, game's dead. Now, the good news is that it dying doesn't seem to have killed the studio yet, but it is joining a long list of games that failed to land. And, to Anderson's credit, Generation Exile did actually reach 1.0 with updates for the few players that he was able to get for his game. That is quite nice. It's a laudable example of an indie dev actually being able to do the right thing by his customers, and I hope people remember that. Maybe check the game out, or, check out his next thing. But the phenomenon that he talked about, and that we just covered with The Cube Save Us, is pretty obviously going on. We've got the ever-mimetic High Guard and Concord, plus a long tail of lower-profile games that just did not last long. And fundamentally, this all comes down to cost, right? Games cost a certain amount of money to make, to run, and to market, so if the people holding the coin purse strings decide that they are done, and you're not really making enough of a return, then they'll just do a High Guard, pull your money away, and development will end. And often, this happens very quickly, and it raises the question, why do people keep gambling their livelihoods on these games? Surely the developers kind of know the state of the market these days. And I'm sure many of them genuinely think they've got a chance to carve out a little niche for themselves. But as we've seen, that's more often than not the case. But even with that being so, it seems these are still the only types of projects being funded, which is really bloody bizarre, because we keep on seeing them fail. It points to an insanity in the games industry. But what I told you, that at least from the perspective of those making these bets, it very much isn't. So, take as an example a small narrative game from an unknown studio. The return from a game like that will not beat the return that investors could get from just parking their money in an index fund. Now, recently, we talked about why everyone with money keeps making the same bet on studios like, say, Rockstar, or to get that type of success. And of course, I bring Rockstar up because the leaks actually tell us the types of money that they're making. Of course, it's not just that. It's not just GTA Online. It's the potential to have a Helldivers or a Marvel Rivals. That's the thing that keeps driving investment. Of course, when those games end up not really happening, well, the studio dies. And what we've seen as consumers is just a rinse and repeat of all of this. But where today's report gets a bit more interesting is one of the companies in gaming thinks that they have found a solution to this cycle. And it's Krafton. Yeah, it's bloody Krafton, who, they haven't really had good press these days, have they? Alright, so Krafton, fresh off losing their legal case against the Subnautica CEO and investing $1 billion into a defense company, well, they've gone back to doing what they do best. and that is being weird about video games. This time, by killing off their latest live service game only 2 months after its launch, despite the company, well, having PUBG money and this game being a PUBG spin-off. The game is PUBG Blind Spot. It was a kind of classic IP spin-off designed to explore different gameplay within the world and within the brand. And what they basically did is use the PUBG brand to sell players on a free-to-play top-down competitive shooter that was designed more around sight lines and clever positioning than just clicking on heads as quickly as you can and doing some scavenging. Now, it launched on February 5th, and by all accounts, it's actually a good game. People liked it. I mean, for a brand new launch of a really big game, it was comfortably sitting around 70% positive with its Steam user reviews, and with those reviews being left by people looking forward to a 12-month early access period. You know, developing the game with the community from a strong start. Sounds good, right? Just that it obviously didn't go that way, because just 2 months later, the game was already shut down. A blog post from the development team confirmed that they were, quote, no longer able to sustainably provide the level of experience that they set out to deliver through early access, which effectively means that projected player numbers and revenue were not good enough. Now, this is not wildly surprising, because even though the launch wasn't a disaster, and by many accounts, well, was pretty good, and for a game that itself was pretty good, well, the player numbers were under 1,000 concurrently on Steam for all of the month of March, and the game basically had no marketing. So it kinda looks like just another game failing to find its audience, being shut down by a big corporate backer who refuses to support it. But as it actually turns out, that was Krafton's plan. Okay, what do I mean by saying this was Krafton's plan? I mean, do they somehow have a cunning plan to, like, make a game and then kill it immediately because somehow profit? Well, in January, they told their investors that they actually wanted to make games like PUBG Blind Spot, and they were looking for a way to build PUBG into a massive brand with multiple revenue streams across multiple games, and that this would mean smaller teams making smaller games on a quick turnaround. And Blind Spot's one of those, because it was made by a team of under 20 people. And in many ways, that makes sense. You know, so far, so investor and analyst dream, right? It all sounds great. But there's actually one more part to this that really is key. Here it is. This structure enables early or targeted releases, such as early access or limited market launches, allowing teams to quickly validate a game's potential before committing additional resources and scaling successful titles. That is the core bit to understand. Honestly, I could see this becoming the new normal for these big companies and how they plan to place their bets. Essentially, Krafton puts a little bit of money in, they get the game in front of at least an audience, and then, if it doesn't make enough, whatever. They pull the team, kill the game, move on to the next thing. It really is the Anderson quote from the top of this video, right? That indie energy of hustling to find something that works. You know, the energy behind Peak, Lethal Company, or, hey, whatever viral game has popped off between the time that I've done this speaking and have done the publishing of this video. Except there's one small difference. That's that Krafton are not a little indie team. They're very big. Their profit last year was more than $700 million. Their targets, then, are not driven by, can the company survive? They are driven by, let's maximize those goddamn returns. And that's all the more obvious with this first example of the plan in action. Because Blind Spot is not a bad game. Not like, say, The Cube Save Us, which, by many accounts, was really not a great game. Blind Spot was niche, but it was liked. It just wasn't popular in the way that Krafton wanted, and that's because, for them, the bar is a mega success at almost no cost. They want to commit enough money to a team of like 20 people to get a game out there, so that they can then see, should we pile shitloads of money behind this idea? So, quite literally, it is disposable games. What that essentially means then is that this game was supposed to fail, and the success basically exists as a bonus, not the thing that is expected in the base case. Krafton allowed for the idea of Blind Spot running a year in early access, but they planned for Blind Spot, and presumably any other game that is built as a part of this initiative, to just get pulled the moment that revenue did not hit whatever the target was. And this is actually something that the games industry is massively experienced at. It's just not the games industry that, if you're a viewer of this channel, you engage in, because it's the mobile game norm. So the thing about this strategy is that it's not new. Mobile games have literally done this for years, and as an example, last year we talked about Activision using generative AI advertising to test market fit for games that did not yet exist. Specifically, there was a new Crash Bandicoot game and the idea of a new Guitar Hero game. just that they weren't actual games, they weren't demos, they were just Gen AI images. Now, the idea, right, is you basically say, hello there, Grok, and Midjourney, and AI friends. Here's a description of a game. Produce a screenshot of this game that we have just described. And then what they do is they run that as an advertisement, and they basically see which one gets more clicks. And whichever one would get more clicks would seem to be the one people are more interested in. Essentially a way to validate a game idea, not by getting a bunch of people to play a demo, but to basically target advertisements at the audience you want and see how they receive it. And in many instances, this goes way further than just images. You've probably seen loads of mobile game ads that have got weird little mini games that aren't the actual game. Well, what they actually often do is they use those weird video things that they make to see which mechanics of a game actually lead to better click-through rates, and then that will drive how the game is actually developed. By the way, I absolutely hate every bit of this. It feels completely anathema to actual human creativity. But you can see why those making the decisions would like this kind of thing. Basically, it's a system that machines a game to a very fine point, targeting as broad as an audience as possible before the thing launches, with you being able to manage your risk as much as you can. And that's actually the escalation here, because on mobile, usually these test games never reach the public in a playable state. Or if they do, it's in the form of a limited beta or a demo. But with Blind Spot, it was a full Steam Early Access release. And you know what? Even that feels a little bit strange. Because with Early Access, it's supposed to be a game that is developed alongside the community. And you can see the good faith approach of that, right? Where players buy in early, right? With maybe some money, with some time. They understand the current state of the game is what it is, and maybe they want to help that game reach its full release. In a world where everyone's acting in good faith, that's great. But of course, Krafton's plan never had that good faith. They weren't going to support that game unless it really took off, despite putting it in the hands of players through a system that was quite literally not built for this kind of business. And you know what? The damage from that could be way further than Blind Spot. I mean, it's not unreasonable to look at this and think, Krafton, are you just abusing Steam Early Access? Here's where I'm worried about this. So on PC, as opposed to mobile, gaming communities actually track publisher behavior. It's one of the things we do in this channel, right? We're actually engaged with that shit. And that means that whenever a publisher that people kind of know and recognize puts a game on Steam with early access, we do actually expect that game to be supported, not in the completely disposable throwaway way that, say, mobile game publishers treat their test games. Now, the problem is, in a world where, say, this happens with Blind Spot, well, the obvious problem becomes convincing audiences to invest time into the next game. Why would they do that when they have seen the publisher already pull the plug, as in Blind Spot? Basically, the methods don't really translate over from mobile to PC in a way that's healthy, because mobile gamers and PC gamers, I would say, are fairly distinct audiences in how they approach gaming, and maybe even how they identify themselves with gaming. And what that means is that while you can see Krafton's logic in this, maybe seeing it as being a bit like Blumhouse, the horror people, they would just have so many movies, and those movies would be fairly cheap to make. And the whole point would be that, look, there will be a few wins, and they certainly have had that. But I think it's just a bit different with video games, and of course now that audiences know Krafton are not really going to back games that they put onto Steam Early Access, well, why the hell should they support the next game that Krafton puts out? They will see Krafton and publisher and think, ugh, that's what's going to happen. But it's not just going to happen to Krafton, is it? These things erode trust in a systemic fashion. So why should people back the next indie title that looks promising, that might even be really good, when we're living in a world where even the biggest companies with the most resources won't honor their commitments? Because remember, they said they were going to do 12 months of early access. And that's the thing. Early access only works because players agree to buy something unfinished on the promise that development continues. And Krafton just showed that that promise can be revoked 2 months in, even when the game works and even when people like it. So every studio that launches into early access after this will be selling that same promise, but they'll be selling it to an audience that just watched it get broken. What Krafton wanted to do was solve a development pipeline problem. They may have actually done that, but just for their pipeline. But the cost of that efficiency improvement? Well, It's that they may have created a huge audience problem for everyone in the games industry. When a big company treats audiences like shit and does not hold up to its commitments, it damages everyone. It damages the entire industry. And when we kind of think, why has gaming got a little bit stagnant? Look, yes, there's macroeconomic factors. Yes, the COVID bubble was going to be a bubble, yes. But is some of it not people just being tired of how gaming companies have consistently treated their audiences and consistently squeezed for more and more? I think all those little paper cuts have added up. And today, seeing Krafton just add another one to the pile kinda sucks, kinda depressing. I'll say this: don't judge indies based on Krafton being a bunch of shitheads, but do judge Krafton based on that and act accordingly. I don't think they are to be trusted. They've made that extremely clear through how they've ran many of their games. Just look at, say, the Callisto Protocol situation, where they yanked months of development time away from that game's dev team, but didn't actually give them more resources to finish the game in the compressed amount of time that they were then left with. And of course, more recently, just look at how their CEO tried to get out of a bad deal that he made. That whole story. And by the way, if you want a refresher on that, well, you should watch this video next. Krafton, you guys are pretty shit at PR.